Hello, everyone. Welcome back again. This is Cureton, Senior Journalist from XR Today, bringing you the latest and greatest from the VR, AR, and XR industries. So we're going to be speaking to an amazing guest who's going to be at the Creativity Conference, which is going to be online, but it's normally hosted in Iceland. So it's a pleasure to speak to you. It's Mr. Paul Doherty. He is the president and CEO of the Digit Group Inc. So is that Dr. or is that Mr. Paul Doherty?
Oh, no, no. You don't want me as a doctor. That's just Mister.
Okay, fine. All right, it was great to have you on today for the show, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into some of the amazing things that are going to be taking place at the Creativity Conference,
Mm.
and then from there talk about some of the things in XR in general. And so it's going to be very exciting. Let's get started. So first, we're going to talk about what are your thoughts on the Creativity Conference? How did you firstly get involved in this?
Well, I have a partner, a business partner. His name's Marbu Dennis. He's originally from Liberia, grew up in the U.S., and his was grew up in a diplomatic family. Except that he decided that he wanted to explore the world on his own without that type of support, and got involved with pro basketball. Actually, instead of going to the NBA, he actually went to Europe and met up with all these very wealthy men that own these European basketball teams. He won a European championship and made his way around Europe and collected people that were involved with what was called family offices and sovereign wealth funds and this type of thing. And he, after his pro basketball career, he started being a business development manager using and leveraging this world. Um, and he's very creative about how he does that. It's not like a straight up management consulting role. He doesn't even call himself a consultant. It's not. It's more of advisory, right? Because he's at that top line level of leadership, which also comes with a lot of responsibility. So his involvement with creativity is based upon a very simple notion of life, where there's a scarcity model out there that a lot of people follow. There's a set amount of pie, and you want your slice of the pie, and you're going to go get it no matter what. And that pie could be anything. It could be money, it could be power, or whatever that is. Yet he comes from a different mindset of abundance. And that idea of abundance really attracted me, where we now have merged our companies so much so that what I do as an architect and a builder and a real estate developer dealing with innovations that we call smart cities, he brings such a perspective into play. And he introduced me to a gentleman named Maxim, who was looking for people that have unusual stories in business, because he runs this thing called the Creativity Conference, and I was mesmerized by it because of the types of people that he brings there. They're from across the board, and his definition of creativity is not what you would think. Creativity, it's a bunch of dreamers and visionaries and people that like to paint or play music. And what does that have to do with business? Well, he twists that so much so that he saw what Marble was saying and said, wow, we could learn from that. And now with me involved, what he's done is that on next Wednesday, which will be October 4th, we're going to be the first keynotes as co-keynote presenters. It's going to be a sit down of listening to Marbu and I as partners talk and start to understand that creativity comes sometimes from a higher calling. And the higher calling, it's not religious, it's more of an energy that people can get behind, which is why people in tech, our involvement with tech for years in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, have been able to be lucky enough to know how to code, and we've designed software from scratch and sold it, and we made a lot of money for venture capitalists and everything else. But because of that, and being an architect with tech, now I have a new tool, and that tool actually creates this digital world, right? So since 1996, when we published what we were doing for the San Francisco Giants baseball team, which was they wanted to show off their brand new baseball stadium to stakeholders like the mayor and city council, but they didn't want to spend a lot of money on showing this 3D model inside of an expensive piece of architectural engineering software. So I went to a friend of mine down in Silicon Valley that was fooling around with this thing called a web browser. And he was going off on a new type of standard beyond HTML, which was two-dimensional ways of looking at data. So web browsers, your website is all HTML at the end of the day. He was going VRML, virtual reality markup language. And Tony Parisi showed us how you could light up a web browser inexpensively and start to communicate in this new medium that we call the Metaverse. And what we did, and the reason why we're keynoting this creativity conference, Maxim's Baby, is because in 1996, I wrote this book. right? And in the book, we actually captured the San Francisco Giants Stadium and how we did it in 1996 of creating the metaverse. So when I hear people start talking about, hey, we're going to create the metaverse, it's like, no, why don't you sit down and learn and read a book? like we've been there, done that. So I'm really excited about this entire world of the digital worlds meeting the physical world, because I'm responsible as a licensed architect for delivering the physical world. What's going to be fascinating, Devin, is in your community, in this XR community, there's also responsibility, which is no longer about creating games on a gaming engine and then saying that that's XR. It's beyond that. There's almost a social responsibility now to connect the physical world and the digital world as a cyber physical relationship. And that's what we're going to be talking about at the Creativity Conference.
Yeah, and these are some of the things that I really enjoy about the Creativity Conference. It's not just simply, oh, we're going to bring our topics and then we'll speak about it and then that's it. It's building that sense of community on multiple levels, not just the practical, enterprise level, but also in the way of thinking. There's a philosophy behind it. There's an energy, like you said, behind it as well. And I think that that was one of the things Maxim was detailing to me when he was explaining to me, like, how the Creativity Conference would actually work. So, to me, that was quite a fascinating approach to it. Speaking of which, we talk a little bit about, your role in the event as well as, how you're going to contribute to the people attending it. Now, what is your approach to this whole creativity conference, and how do you expect, like during your keynote, to reach out to the community as well as to teach them creativity? Is there like an approach that you want to take to it?
Well, yeah, of course, because I think it's about this idea of having a way of not pontificating and being professor-like about where it's you follow these steps and this is what you get. Creativity is actually a well-honed skill when you can actually then communicate in a way for that involves storytelling, right? One thing that I've been given a gift, I feel like Forrest Gump, I just have it, which is I can take highly complex technical things and make them very simple to understand to the average person. And who I test? I tested against my 12-year-old son, who's actually quite technology adept, because those are the new natives in this new medium, right, of the virtual worlds of metaverse and all that. And we're the immigrants. So that's one way of testing, and is my way of explaining things coming through. But the other one was with my 80-year-old Irish immigrant mother, who does not like technology except for FaceTime, because she can FaceTime with her grandkids, and hates everything else. Except that last Christmas, I actually got actually 2 Christmases ago during COVID, I was able to get a Quest 2 head mounted display. And had my son and my wife get one, right? And they play all sorts of things now, and it's part of their daily routine. And what I found really interesting about it is that how you explain things to an audience, I need to explain to my mom. So on Christmas dinner night, after dinner, I sat her down on a chair in the middle of our living room, and I wanted to go to her hometown in Ireland to show her what's there now. And there's an app for that, right? There's a certain app that you can download onto the Quest 2. And she was complaining, I don't want to put this thing on, da, 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 da. And suddenly I put it on her head and she stopped and she started to look around and she started to giggle. And then she got a little angry. She said, now what happened to my field? I'm sitting across from where I grew up and I'm looking the field and now there's a bunch of houses there. And she started to get into it. She didn't realize that was about the tech. And I think that's one really cool thing about how do you approach an audience that is so broad. They can be from healthcare, they can be from entertainment, they can be from these different areas. But how do you start to explain things without melting it down so much where it doesn't have any meaning? And what I've personally discovered, and what I'm still learning, is about this level of experience or level of engagement that we're involved with. Because in my industry, we have this thing called level of detail for our models. You don't want a photorealistic model if you're trying to explain something to a person that is a painter or a plumber or something like that. You're trying to build a physical asset out there and build a building and have people populate it. And that's the goal of what this communications medium is, which is a digital medium now. It's no longer paper like blueprints. So how do we get around understanding how do you interface with this thing, right? And what level of detail do we need so that it's not too abstract, but they can get their work done. Well, we've now pulled that back because that's the way that building information modeling, or BIM it's called, was put together. It was called level of detail because we knew there were going to be different audiences for that same model. We're now into the immersive world that also involves things like augmented reality, the more immersive virtual reality, and all of these different ways of explaining what you're looking at. What we're creating is a responsible illusion of what's in reality. And what's really cool about what that means is that when you're touching this thing, we're no longer using things like a mouse. We're not using a keyboard. We're using avatars. And this is something that my mom started to get because she was in the form of an avatar in this app looking at her hometown in Ireland while sitting here in Memphis, Tennessee, right? It was like the light bulb went off. And that's the type of moment where the technology becomes transparent to the experience. And that's when it's beautiful.
Yeah, you touched on some really, really interesting points. Is even when we think about it from the enterprise angle, because with at XR today we do focus on the enterprise, we don't really understand that when we put these in different parts of the enterprise, it's affecting people's lives, whether or not they're going into healthcare and they're able to recover from cancer treatment like chemotherapy, and they're actually in these immersive worlds, and then they're able to interact, and their recovery rates have skyrocketed. They have
Mhm.
much less time they spend in the hospital compared to if they were just by themselves and getting feeling depressed. In education, the creativity that we put into these ideas that we put out there are teaching kids. They're keeping them engaged in ways we've never seen before. 75% retention rates, 80% retention rates, depending on how you look at it. And then you also look at the idea that with BIM, what you were focusing on is that we can now see a building in its full, one-to-one scale without even building it yet. And then we can just, lay
Mhm.
the foundation and go from there, all from these augmented reality headsets. So that to me is the creativity part of it. It's the ability to go from nothing to something. It's kind of like the way the Big Bang worked. So it's pretty cool. I wanted to ask you a little
It
bit
is.
about this. So, we talk a little bit about creativity. How would you say people would apply creativity to the XR sector? Like,
Well, I think that there is, again, a different way of looking at the elephant, right? People that are at the trunk swear that's the elephant or the tusk. Well, I'm usually touching the butt, so, that's my luck. But at the end of the day, it's still the elephant. And this idea of this new medium, because that's really what this is, it's a new medium. We're all feeling it around so that people that are in the healthcare sector, they are learning how to interface with this grand illusion, right? But what we're finding, especially in the built environment, that we can now start to implement that as a design tool that crosses both that cyber physical relationship, where it's not just a grand illusion, it's actually a functional part of a process, a functional part of a workflow. And let me give you a for instance. There's the world's largest project is going on in Saudi Arabia right now called NEOM. We're part of it. And we were asked to create a healthcare system for this brand new province inside the country of Saudi Arabia. So there was nothing there, and we had to create a healthcare world. Well, we were asked to create a hub and spoke system, just like we have here in the US or like in Australia, where you have a general hospital, then you have around that geographically medical centers, right? And they all feed into the hub and spoke. Like if you're really, really sick, you go to the general hospital, right? But we thought differently. And we actually said, no, let's start getting down to the human centric part about this because that's where the creativity comes in the world of XR. When you start to take a human centric approach, we hired one of the world's foremost cultural anthropologists to come in and start to understand what the constraints were, which was they need a hub and spoke system. Okay. But what would happen if we spent more money and more time, more tools on healthy people rather than everything on sick people? Just to your point, you can have recovery rates that are faster so that you're not putting as much strain on the system so you don't need as many beds. Well, that saves money, saves time, is more efficient for that individual. And instead of the hub being a general hospital, what would happen if that individual person, that citizen or that traveler to Neom is the center point. They are the hub, and there's medical services that help them. And what would happen if you went one step further, in that everything that we design, we're going to put 10,000 steps in place for you every day, and you don't know it. You feel it, you can see it on your Fitbit, but the bottom line is when you walk from where you live to where you can get mass transportation to go to work, to go shopping, to go to the restaurant, we're building into 10,000 steps. And that's the way that you start to create transformation, where people start to become healthier. They start to make proper choices. And it's not like putting like a Fitbit on and every time you want a McDonald's hamburger, it's going to zap you. I mean, that's possible. But at the end of the day, when you start talking about XR, there are going to be certain points that then trigger your own story, because every person's life is different. Every person has their own chapters to create, their own narratives, their own way of understanding how do we start to live inspired? How do we start to live in this world that has a great energy and creates an environment that can be nurturing? That is not creating utopia. I mean, we're smarter than that. But what it does do is that it brings in XR that starts to fill in parts of people's lives where, I would actually hate if the future turned out to look like Blade Runner, or we're immersed inside of like a Ready Player One world that sounds pretty cool, but all they want to do is escape reality. If reality is that bad, we're doing something wrong, right? So the idea is to augment experiences, allow the digital world to start to support what you need in the physical world so that they work in conjunction with each other. That's the way that we're starting to look at XR on a massive scale, so much so that, this term, the industrial metaverse, is real. Our discussions with the higher leadership of Meta is fully committed to this. They're like, we understand. Because when you start to take a look at how the digital realm has always worked, there's always the fun social world, and then there's the business world. Think of AOL and CompuServe, right? Fast forward to Web 2, we have Facebook and LinkedIn. What they're going to do is start to meld those two things together so that there's a live, work, play, learn environment. And we're not designing it for people like us. We're designing it for my kid and their generations to come. So again, I always make sure that my 12-year-old son comes in who's a wonder. I mean, he started off with Minecraft, which is very creative, right? Creative mode and all that. Went into Roblox to learn how to kind of make up your own games and code. But now he's an aficionado of Fortnite. That's the pecking order of this generation, right? Like he's in his PhD world in Fortnite right now. And when I take a look at how they interface, they don't see any difference between the digital and physical worlds through friendship to who's a jerk and who's nice and blah, 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 blah. They're having their childhood. It's just that they're in two different realms of how to communicate. And I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, like I said, there's so much stuff that I love about this that makes me feel like the people at the creativity conference, are going to be more visionary than the average person, and I think that that's incredible to actually hear about. For example, like when I was growing up, I remember the Nintendo when that was introduced to my life. It was just all bets were off. My life was irrevocably changed from that point on, and then even going into other systems and so on. But technology, as we've always seen, is the driving force for humanity, and the way we actually use it determines exactly the course that humanity is going to go on. These are really quite insightful things that we can look at. How we design the technology, and with that creativity, find out new pathways for humanity to evolve. And so, like even the example you mentioned with Neom, designing the systems so that way there is a greater connectivity between people and also between their health and their progress throughout life. Making the walkable city, making a smart city that kind of pushes people to do certain things. These are amazing things that we can do with the technologies that we've got, and especially in XR. I think we'll see a lot of that. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, like, we talk about smart city technologies, and we talk also about the industrial metaverse, digital twins, building information modeling, BIM, others. Like, how do you see all of this converging? Your vision of it 50 years from now?
Hopefully, it's transparent and we don't have to talk about it, right? Because so in order to understand where The growth of technology and how that affected my career actually starts when I went to school. Right? So I was in architectural school in New York City. Great place to be an architect, right? Especially a student. And I had the choice of taking some time off of school and then working. It was called work study, right? And so I took the program, but I didn't want to work at a traditional architectural engineering firm because I'd be doing bathroom details for 3 years. So I joined IBM at their headquarters just north of New York City. And I was the guy that figured out how to best showcase all of their hardware, because they were the computer kings back in the 80s, right? And software, where they were working with these startup companies called Microsoft and Adobe. Right. I'm really old. But at the end of the day, I was the guy that designed all the trade show booths. So Comdex, PC Expo, all that stuff. I had to learn how networks worked. And I'm an architect. I build buildings, right? But I noticed that the world of hardware and software were very, very similar in process to constructing a building. You needed to have a foundation, you needed to have core and shell, and then you had fit out. Um, it was the same thing with tech. So I've always been thinking through and wanting to visualize and finally deliver a world where the building is a computer. And when you connect the buildings together, it creates the Internet of Buildings to create a safer, healthier, more interactive, more entertainment world, right? So with that in mind, when we started to take a look at moving from hand drawings to 2D CAD, right? Computer aided drafting really was what it was. That was an electronic pencil. And there, yes, there were certain things that we had to redo, but what it saved us is not so much the initial drawing of drawings. It was the changes, because everything always changes because of field conditions, this thing and that thing. And I can make them quicker. So we started to see that when we started going into building information modeling. Um, this was the idea of just 3D CAD, right? Except that all of a sudden we realized, wait a second, this thing can host data inside of a 3D vessel that we can communicate better. Right. Fast forward to now, we're able now to take that same 3D model and put it onto a gaming engine to further explore or better explain to people either building the building, running the building, or inhabiting the building. Now all of a sudden we have, wow, a different way of looking at things. But what we're very cognizant of and what we failed as a profession, as an industry, and as society is that if you were lucky enough to be able to spend $3,000 on a piece of software, you could play in the game. But what happens to everyone else, right? What about those kids that were really, really talented, but they didn't have the money and they couldn't be an architect? So what it's one of my passions is to democratize almost everything to do with exactly what you said. There's all these tech things, but should it be limited to a socioeconomic class that because you can't find the $350 to actually get a Quest 2, you can never experience that immersive part of XR. So one of the things that we do is that every time we design either a virtual world, being able to stand these things up as part of our business plan, like we get involved with $1 billion projects, which means our construction loans are very expensive, right? Which means that we figured out that the digital asset that we need to actually build these buildings in theme parks and cities, I can actually use that and post it up online and create a revenue generating fun place to come to. In Qingdao, China, what's coming up out of the ground is a virtual reality theme park that we designed. It's going to be open a year before it physically opens. We're talking Tencent, we're talking with Epic Games, we're talking with Blizzard Activision, all these people, because they're going to be the tenants in here. And what we're promising them is that once we go live up online, revenues are coming your way because people are going to go, wow, this is really cool. I want to come here, blah, blah, blah. It becomes like a department store for gaming, right? Now, what's really cool about this is that the back of the napkin, what we're estimating, we're going to be lowering our construction loan by 8% on a $1.7 billion project. That's real money. That's real use of XR in a way that becomes not just a tool, but it becomes a business plan. But the way that we're doing this and the way that we designed it is the primary way of entering is this. It's a phone and a tablet. Most of the world can afford that. Put it this way, we're trying to get down to everyone affording things like that. But for the most part, you can actually start to access these types of ways of communication. The next wave would be the access to XR through a browser, which means it could be on a laptop and blah, 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 all this stuff. But the ultimate way of having, again, that level of experience is actually then through a head-mounted display or glasses or whatever they're going to come up with next. Neural networks with Mr. Musk, right? So we're always not dumbing it down, but providing the proper access for the majority of people to participate, because we don't want to leave people behind. Again, we don't want the haves and the have-nots, because I think we've actually done not a poor job. I think we've done a bad job at starting to say, here we have all this access, but forget those people. Sorry that you are there, but why not actually have that now as a way of democratizing things and really being inclusive for real? Not, the way that some attempts are there where they think like they've checked all the boxes and they're done. This is an ongoing process. There is no finish line, because the technology will continue to move forward. When we start talking about things like currencies, right? You had the crypto bros in one phase. Now we're into the world where the governments are getting involved with with central bank digital currency, literally going up against Apple Pay, and in the case in China, like of WeChat Pay, right? These are ways of lowering the hurdles of getting into digital transformation, so that the promise of everything that you publish and the community that you have them allows us to actually uplift them, right? Because we're giving them the opportunity to use the tools and to start to look at data differently. My generation, when it comes to data, it's either in an Excel spreadsheet or in a database, and you talk to the average person, they go eye rolls. It's like, oh God. But when you start to really take a look at what things like blockchain can do to that, it directly affects XR. Think of XR as a body, right? But you need certain systems in place. You need your circulation system, your digestive system, your pulmonary system. All of these things have to be in place. And what we're starting to see is that things that can be trusted, things like smart contracts, being able to trust the data now, because this guy says I trust you, this guy says I trust you. Finally, we're getting to a golden thread, because unfortunately the data is the blood and the oxygen that runs through XR, and unfortunately it's very dirty right now. But again, we're sharpening the sword. We're watching these next generations using things like blockchain, smart contracts, and now with the maturity factor of machine learning becoming, LLMs and AI. I mean, there's some fun things happening out there. And I constantly get this question about AI and how it interfaces into this new medium of the metaverse and XR. And I'm like, well, the way I look at it is everyone's afraid about AI taking their jobs, and that will never, ever happen. A person using AI will absolutely take your job. It's just another tool. So we're in a fascinating place right now where 50 years from now, to answer your question, with the world of smart cities and these urban experiences, there will be more and more people in cities. And unfortunately, there's going to be certain cities that have certain policies that are rolling things back to the point where we have homeless problems, we have immigration problems, we have stresses on services of infrastructure, everything from water to power to transportation, that you're going to be creating slums. And I don't think anyone wants to live in the world of Star Wars Tatooine, right? I mean, we don't want that. We don't want the craziness. What we want to do is, not create this dystopian future that Hollywood thinks that that's what the future's about. I don't want to live in Blade Runner. I don't want my kid living in Blade Runner. But what we can do is provide positive tools, start the storytelling process using this new medium, so that we do have the proper way of being in a civilized society that promotes from within, and that we can feel those vibrations, and have the business community start to realize that it's about love. The word love, people automatically think is romance, but that's not quite true. It's everything is connected to everything, and I'm just learning how to see. So in 50 years, I do not have a vision about what that looks like, but I have a very good vision about how we can actually start to propel environments to allow humans to be humans and let that be their next world.
Absolutely, brilliantly put. And one of the things you think about when it comes to love is like the strongest force in the universe, as many would say. But additionally, having these new systems that we can create, for example, Lemon of One's doing an amazing job with, getting blockchain system. I think it was either layer one or layer two security, going into the metaverse, and now allowing for that Web3 aspect of it. There are still people that are very passionate about making sure that it remains Web3. When I was looking at
Hmm.
the European Union's like kind of metaverse plan or its metaverse strategy, they're
Hmm.
skipping to Web 4, and I think that that's kind of a mistake. I think that's going to cost people down the road, but that's just my opinion. What we need to do is like that, like you said, find practical solutions to making things work in a better way for all of humanity. Like we have medicines, we have drugs, we have all of these new technologies that have made us better in some ways and worse in other ways. And it's best to keep us moving towards the better because I do think we can optimize that so that people can make a better difference in the world. So when it comes to XR, one of the things I'm passionate about is the fact that people can create their own worlds, whether that is for business, whether that is for enjoyment, conversation, whether that's for learning. I don't think there's going to be just one metaverse, but it's going to be like a multiverse where there's a lot of different overlapping intersectional metaverses that will kind of work in tandem with one another, share data in certain ways. But it's going to really, really make things, synergist in the in the near future. So yeah, one of the things is I really, really can't wait to actually like see what people speak about at this conference. Now, I guess the last thing we can chat about is, did you see any kind of trends taking place in the here and now? Maybe moving forward, we had the MetaQuest 3, we've had Apple Vision Pro, we've had some very, very high highs and very low lows. Because as a
Hmm.
journalist, I don't like to have to report on negative news all the time, but when I see like Meta getting hit hard, Apple getting slagged off a little bit, and then some of the companies struggling in 2022, and now slowly making a resurgence. What kind of trends did you notice about that?
Really, really great question. And by the way, I've really enjoyed this. Your community is something that you're nurturing, and I couldn't think of a better cat herder would be a good word, not just journalist, right? Being able to take all of this and create those storylines out of it. So I would answer your question with that same type of that energy and that way of saying, yeah, that there's a lot of kittens out there. And sometimes when you start to see, a really great idea, but that because of their maturity as a business, maybe they're startup early stage, that they're being pushed into growth stage quicker than they need to be because of people that would like to make money. That's the scarcity model. Which is why we've partnered up with an arm of the sovereign wealth fund of the United Arab Emirates. So when we go in and we make investments, we do it through impact investing, meaning that we give ourselves a longer roadway or runway actually to allow these maturity cycles to happen. Which is why when I take a look at some of these startup groups, because that's where innovation really, really counts, right? I'm either watching them run like crazy, like a year ago to SPAC. Why did you need to go public? I was a Fortune 500 officer at one time in my career. I hated being public. It was awful because the shareholders were driving your business, not the need, not the social justice, all that stuff that is really, really important was glided over in, just for the sake of the almighty dollar, right? I'm starting to see that now repeat itself. So not to be negative Nancy over here, but there's a lot of folks out there that are throwing money at things like anything to have those two letters AI in it, where I'm going, have you really thought this through? Like, this is a maturing type of technology. A number of months ago, maybe even 2 years ago, the big thing was anything with the metaverse, right? Money being thrown at it because, of course, Mark and his team over at Meta were throwing a lot of money at it. So that was going to be the next big thing for what? Advertising? That's really what you thought this was? This isn't Web 2 going to Web 3, and Web 3 means as just 3D web. And we're just going to do the same thing that Facebook always does into a social manner. That was a wrong strategy. What I'm seeing now is a real look, a hard look at looking through those AI crazinesses, that are out there. Chatbots are not the answer. Chatbots are kind of easy, right? OpenAI did a masterful job of allowing the media to see this thing, and then when you took a look at it, it's wow. Okay, for the first 3 hours, you're going, this is amazing, and then all of a sudden, you ask it to do something difficult, like building a building, Hey, ChatGPT, finish this. Right? It can't. It does certain things, and that's great. But I think the human need, the human condition, the human community needs to catch up to the technology now in order to rein things in so that we can take a more business-like approach with an understanding that we can do greater good. You know, you're running a bank. Can keep on doing that. That's an important element for how our societies work. But at the end of the day, don't throw a baby out with the bathwater. Same thing in healthcare, education, transportation, energy, water, all these things that matter. There's a lot of jobs and a lot of people that are probably listening to this particular cast that are going, yeah, how do I fit into that? Yada, yada, yada. Well, guess what? It's going to start with you as an individual that are listening right now. It's up to you. It's not up to you with your community with XR. It's not up to me with my industry, working with leadership and doing these mega projects all over the world. But we both have a responsibility. That responsibility is to get the message out that when we start to see things in AI, question just because we can, should we? Right? So here in Tennessee, I'm outside of Memphis, Tennessee, right smack in the middle of the U.S. And there is one school district where my son goes to where AI it's encouraged from the standpoint of using it as a tool, but it's not meant to be the crutch. It's almost like the way that you learn math. In today's world, you're allowed to bring a calculator into school. When I grew up, forget that. That was seen, you got to learn old school first. Same thing with AI. When you start seeing ChatGPT in these worlds and how that would interface inside of an XR environment, I think it's good that the schools and the teachers learn how to get in front of it so that people learn how to use it as a tool, not a crutch. There's other school districts around here that ban it. I'm going, you're creating an unfair competition that when you're graduating your kids out of your school district, they're not prepared because everyone else is using those tools. You know what I mean? So there's double-edged swords of everything that's emerging right now, Damon, from the world of AI, this Web3 approach, and then how does it interface into an XR environment? And then you question the XR, right? Because in my case, I have to create 3D worlds, right? Because I have to then push it into a world that creates, and this is ridiculous, we have to create 3D models, right? Which then we can look at from a design aspect and simulate and do all this stuff so that we know that when we're actually putting the bricks out in the field, it's going to work, right? That's one great tool for a model. But the bottom line is we still print out 2D drawings. It's like, wow, really going old school. And that's how the plumbers and the electricians and the framers and the painters, that's how they build the built environment, is through that. But what I am learning is that I need to describe different levels of experience because that's now my new interface. This idea of avatars is a huge big deal because when you start to put not the pixelated type of avatars, but like what Epic Games is doing with their MetaHuman program, you're creating humanoids that emulate you. You're putting a GoPro camera on your face. You're reading through a script, and it knows that the way that I talk, I move a very unique type of face. It's a face made for radio, but that's another story. But at the end of the day, it's capturing my essence. It will also now, through AI, especially with large language models, it will now start to emulate my decision making processes, how I talk, how I express myself when I'm happy, sad, all these different things. And I've created a digital twin of me, which means that I can take gaming metaphors out into the built environment in a practical way and say, just like Fortnite never ends. It's an online game that never ends. It's when you or you and your team go in to play on Fortnite Island in the form of, I don't know, the Avengers or Spider-Man, whoever, whatever that is only for a short period of time, but the game never ends. So we're now treating every one of our construction sites that it never ends. It always will be there. The human interface of being there and physically building the built environment is going to be one phase. But at 5 o'clock, when they got to go home because they got to rest because they're humans, the avatars take over on the digital twin equivalent of that particular job site. So it'll start to do things like reconcile. It'll start to look and make sure that the supply chain of materials and equipment come the next day. All those things that usually happen first thing in the morning is now taken care of. it's either going to be a spectacular failure or a step in the right direction and nothing in between. But when you start to take that gaming metaphor to its essence, what I am looking at right now and what people are really smart doing, they're not looking so much as the chatbots, but they're training their machines as agents. This is a really, really big deal because if you can have intelligence like a subject matter expert that could be summoned at any time to be your intellectual knowledge that you may not have, that all of a sudden, let's say I'm an architect, I've never done a library before, but I can actually have a non-player character out of gaming world, an NPC, that is a subject matter expert on everything to do with libraries. From pre-design to design to construction to facility management and operations. And guess what? I pay $29.99 a month for those characters. So I can actually have a back office right now with accounting, HR, sales, marketing, administration, all AI, which means as a sole practitioner, I can compete against the largest architectural firms in the world. That's democratization. That means that we're giving people a chance to inspire their own environment and allow the average person to say, like in Liberia, right, in the northwest quadrant of Liberia, they want to put up a school, but in the traditional way of doing it, the school probably will never be built. But the IMF thinks that they've done the right thing by giving them money. But because of humans and the way all that works, But what would happen if I was a local and I could actually do it myself, educate the local permitters, the people that inspect, and actually get the school done because it's for my community, and it was all done because I knew how to use the tool of AI. That's the promise from 50 years from now that I hope we can actually have there because we have an entire generation coming into the workforce very soon that grew up on Minecraft. They built their own environments. They built their own playgrounds. They built their own forts and all this other stuff. Well, let's make that real. Let's make sure that if that's the way that they want to do it, well, let's not make sure that the old traditional way of having to get an architect, an engineer, contractor, and everything else, and of course we have to have the government involved and everyone pays taxes and blah, 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 blah. That may still happen, but I'm thinking that in the future generations, we're going to be able to manage, build, and just love our built environment so that it allows us to do what we really want out there, which is to live a better life.
Phenomenal conversation. Yeah, I would love to go on about it. Maybe go over maybe over a coffee or a beer or whatnot. But I'm looking forward to hearing more of those conversations, at the Creativity Conference. So that's going to be really, really exciting to see. So yeah, once again, everyone, we've been speaking to Paul Doherty. He is the president and CEO of the Digit Group Inc. We've been speaking a little bit about the Creativity Conference, which is going to take place next week. October 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, October 3rd to 5th. And from there, we're going to see a lot of good conversations going on. So I'll leave the link in the description box below. Once again, my name is Cureton, Senior Journalist from XR Today. And thanks so much for following these conversations. And until next time, bye now.